Hey, and welcome to this episode of Build versus Buy, a 30-minute conversation with product and engineering leaders about situations during their career where they've had to decide whether to build or buy. If you'd like to be a guest, reach out to me at mangit@useanvil.com. That's MANGGIT@useanvil.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating/review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Enjoy this episode.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Build vs. Buy podcast. I'm your host, Mangit Ng, founder and CEO at Anvil, the fastest way to build software for documents. And today I have the honor of interviewing Luke Thomas, who is the Senior Director of New Products at Zapier. Luke, welcome to the show.
I'm stoked to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're stoked to have you. I'm stoked to have you because this is just a two-person conversation, not we. But yeah, maybe just start. I would love to get a little bit of background on yourself, what you're working on at Zapier. Zapier, hopefully people listening to this podcast know what Zapier is, but always happy to have you to give it another plug.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm Luke. I have been at Zapier for going on 2.5 years. I am, the director of new products over here, which basically means that I get to work on little mini startups inside of an existing company that's been around for right around a decade. And Zapier as an organization is going from being a single product company known for our workflows, specifically Zaps, to trying to solve more problems for our customers with multiple products so you can stitch and stack together. Yeah, it's been a fun journey. I started off at Zapier as a product manager on one of the new products called Interfaces. And then now I oversee 4, which is Interfaces, our AI Chatbots product, Tables, and Canvas. Before that, I was founder and CEO of a company called Friday. We were trying to build like a remote work intranet of sorts. And it was based on almost a decade of working remotely. So I just tried to solve a variety of problems that I experienced over and over and again. But most of my career has been spent in early stage tech, mixture product and growth roles. And I like building product and I like trying to grow it. I live here in Nashville or in the Nashville area. I have 3 kids, 5 and under, a couple dogs. It's busy over here, but it's a lot of fun. So that's the spiel.
That's the spiel. So the real question is, how's your guitar skills? You live in Nashville. You got to play something. Right?
No.
Putting you on the spot.
No, definitely not. I am an enjoyer of music. And there's people that I see periodically, that's a famous person or that's a musician. It's like, I have no idea who you're talking about. But yes, I am an enjoyer of music. And the good news is you could go basically anywhere. In my world, it's date night because you have 3 kids. But you could basically go anywhere and there's great music. So that is definitely one of the perks of living in the Nashville area.
That's awesome. I'm excited to learn more about Nashville. Maybe not on this podcast, but definitely maybe after we're done recording here. Would love to quickly dive into some of the products you just mentioned at Zapier. I know Zapier, as many listeners will know, has historically been a connector of products, right? And now you're bringing parts of those connected products into Zapier. You mentioned, I believe, Interfaces, Chatbot, Canvas, and one other one, I believe. What was the last one?
Tables.
Okay. Which I think Chatbot is probably the most self-explanatory, but would you be able to quickly describe what Interfaces, Tables, and Canvas is?
Yeah, sure. So I'll do my best to work through them. I would say the high level thesis is that if you think about any piece of software, there are, if you're familiar with this concept, most engineers are, it's called the model view controller. Internally, we call it logic, views, and database. But the idea is like every piece of software has a database, it has views that you interact with the data in the database, and there's a logic layer. And if you think about the Zapier product that has existed for the last 10 years, which is workflows, that covers that piece of logic. But what people oftentimes do is they will find and use other tools for views, and then they will try to store the data that is flowing through a workflow in a database. And so what we saw over and over again was just that people are creating these systems using Zapier. And what happens is when you're using third-party products, they're very good at specialized use cases. But when you're integrating it with Zapier, things can oftentimes break and it becomes unreliable, right? Because you're you're interacting with third-party software and they change an API, sometimes it breaks. And what happens is, because we're that kind of logic layer, we will ping our customers about, hey, there's a problem. But they view it as our problem. And so
Yeah.
it makes things a little challenging, right? Because you're trying to create these robust, repeatable, predictable processes, but there's certain things outside of your control. And so we're like, hey, how can we better solve the customer problem? And
Hmm.
so that led us down this journey of, hey, we have the ability to really talk to our customers to understand the jobs to be done. And we can provide what I like to call like a thin layer of tooling, right? It's not about being best in class. We have no interest in. But
Hmm.
if there's like a thin way to collect information using something like forms, render information, store information, there's almost like an 80-20 rule at play, right? It's
Hmm.
you can solve a lot of problems without building this deep array of functionality. And so we're interested in providing these building blocks that can repeatedly solve the problems that people face. So anyway, Model V controller, that's the paradigm. Now, how that plugs into the new products that I'm working on with our teams to build is tables. It's a
Hmm.
database. It's a no-code database that's built for automation. So imagine a relational database that can connect with 7,000 apps. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that's tables. Interfaces is like a drag and drop, no code interface building experience. So it
Hmm.
allows you to build forms. It allows you to build data grids and views to render and show your information. And you can click buttons in the interface and then take action using our automation product. So it's about interfaces that can connect with
Yeah.
7,000 apps in this instance. Then we have Canvas, which is it's like a business process builder. So if you imagine it's an easy way to visualize and diagram things, right? In our
Hmm.
world, we have a lot of people that create these really complicated and complex and very robust systems, but it's very difficult to display it in a way that makes sense for someone who's a bit more disconnected from the inner workings of the process. But they still want to know, right? They still want to
Yeah.
know what's going on. And so, yeah, having this kind of bird's eye view of a business process gives you the ability to start really thinking about things holistically and start stacking in. How can I improve this process over time? How much time is it actually saving our organization? So yeah, that's Canvas. And then yeah, AI chatbots, it basically allows you to spin up an AI powered chatbot, looks at your business data and allows you to embed it on your website, answering questions and collecting leads without the need for live chat.
Nice. Yeah. So it feels like in a lot of ways, it's another interface, the AI chatbot. It's another
Exactly.
interface into the world, right? Um,
Yes.
that's really cool. I feel like you're absolutely right. Zapier has been this tool that has really brought the ability to build software for businesses to people who are maybe not as technical. And sometimes in connecting third parties, the reliability is not quite there. And you really do need some level of reliability when you're running some marketing campaign or other types of campaigns. And so bringing it in-house a little bit does alleviate some of those challenges because you, as Zapier, have control over it. And I'm pretty confident this is not the build versus buy conversation you were hoping to have, but definitely a nice like segue into the build versus buy conversation. And audience, for those who are listening, I do not know what the build versus buy conversation is going to be about. So that's why I say I'm pretty confident. I like to have a level of surprise as well and just see where this conversation goes. So yeah, so maybe with that, we can segue into a little bit of the build versus buy conversation that you were hoping to have. And maybe you can just set the scene a little bit, like which company, like the
Yeah.
space and tooling that you were looking at. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I'll set the frame here. This is a fun and unique part of my role is that imagine working on four different startups at once, right? Each product oftentimes needs to procure software or they need to figure out, do we want to build, do we want to buy? And like any good startup, I would argue there's this question of, is it our core competency or not? Where's the key value prop? And is this something that a vendor out there has done a better job solving for? And so it's fun because I feel like I have four different products that I can think of when it comes to this. And especially around this time last year, I was doing a lot of conversations around basically software or procurement. Oh, it's hard to
Yeah.
say that word. And I feel like I have a variety of examples where we've run into this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna frame things up with a specific example, but I do think that it's also important. I'm assuming there's a decent number of like startup founders and startup people that are gonna listen to this. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that I wish I knew as a startup founder is just the amount of stakeholders involved in the conversation. And you might have a product manager that is looking at a build versus a buy decision.
Hmm.
And gosh, where do I even begin? They see something enticing in the market and they're like, hey, we should implement these APIs in our product. And so maybe they sign up for an account and they like what they see. Well,
Hmm.
then inevitably you're going to hit some type of plan limit. And oftentimes it's like shadow IT, right? Maybe there's a credit card laying around somewhere and you swipe it. Like in bigger companies, it's actually a little bit more difficult to even get the credit card. And so
Yeah.
you need to talk with people. Oh yeah, hey, I'm trying out this software. And depending on if it's a small dollar value, you can sneak something in. If it's a bigger dollar value, it's more difficult.
Hmm.
So that's part one. Part two is then there's also the product life cycle that needs to be considered. And so a product in beta, for example,
Hmm.
it's much easier to find software and it's easier to get things in, but you still have to collaborate with legal and there's still requirements that are in flight, right? And so we could use this because our beta terms are more lax than our general availability products, but it doesn't give you carte blanche access to try things. And so you have to be thoughtful about that. This is like a year and a half of learning for what it's worth.
Yeah.
So I really want to just,
If I can interject here real quick, I think one thing that I keep hearing from the setup here is like when it comes to build versus buy decisions, oftentimes it's about accessibility in the sense that, hey, if I'm an individual at an organization, do I even have access to go test this tool? Do I need IT? Do I need procurement? Do I need a credit card? And there's different levels of that. But then at the same time, when you're going to buy a tool, presumably they've thought a lot about how to make that tool accessible to their end customer. In many situations, not all, but like most situations when you're building, it's like you need a developer. But with Zapier, again, a great example, it's, hey, I could actually just put my really smart operations person on this. They'll figure it out. And they're just a generalist, and I can have my engineers focus on building our product. So there's that level of accessibility that is pervasive throughout this process as well. And so, yeah, sorry, just want to
no, it's totally
point
a
that
thing.
out.
And these are all things that I feel like if you've worked in startups most of your career, like I did before joining Zapier, you don't really fully understand. Oh, it should be easy to buy. It's actually a lot more difficult to buy than so I think how I would encourage like an early stage founder in particular to noodle on this is you need to create a really great product experience without a lot of friction that helps build conviction to go through these hoops.
Mm.
And so anyway, yeah, you have these kind of I don't want to call them roadblocks, but they're doors that you need to open. And so you need to have strong enough conviction that it's worth it. Here's another thing too. When procuring software, it's easier to find and pay for software if it is connected to something that helps generate revenue, right? So one of my old mentors actually still is a mentor. He would always say this thing and I never appreciated it enough, but it was people pay for software for three things: to make money, to save money, to be more productive. And if
Mm.
you can help businesses make more money, it's a way easier sell. And so if you're thinking about a build versus buy decision, it's actually easier to build than buy, even if it might take longer. If you are building or evaluating the decision in a part of the business that does not drive revenue, right? It's way
Mhm.
easier to say, oh, we're going to spend some ridiculous amount of time working on building the thing
Yeah.
instead of going out and trying to deal with building a business case. Um,
That's interesting. That's like the most classical trap that like product people fall into, right? It's like until, a lot of people think that or believe that if you build it, they will come. And so you spend all your time building, but you haven't built the business case. And so as you are building and you don't have to worry about being revenue generating or being creating value in terms of revenue for the company, you can just keep building. And it's easy to just keep building and not raise your head up and say, hey, where else could I be spending these resources? Because one, building is fun for a lot of
Yeah.
people and presumably product people. And two, the disconnect from the actual revenue gives you a little bit of a air cover, it seems.
Absolutely. And so this is, I would argue, one of the major reasons why a lot more software is built than bought.
Mm,
And so I think it's really important, whether you're an engineer manager or product manager, is like you really need, there are pieces of software that should be procured because it is not your core competency. Like you should
mhm.
do that. And a lot of people, they don't want to build the business case. But in reality, that's actually the right decision that needs to be made because engineers are not cheap. Um,
Yeah.
there's an opportunity cost. So anyway, I say this all to frame up this specific example that I'm thinking of. And I'll share, like, here's the problem. This was
Okay.
this was a recent example. This was like maybe 2 months ago. And this was with our AI Chatbots product, a very fast growing product. And we have been just really spending a bunch of time on our data sources functionality. For those unaware with the product, just disclaimer, it's imagine like ChatGPT, but with your business data that you can embed on a website. And so it's really important that we make it easy to basically shovel data into the system so that it can be
Mm,
used for retrieval, right? Very simple. And so the market was demanding, hey, like I should be able to upload a PDF. That's like maybe that's like the easiest instantiation of the product. But then people are like, hey, I want to be able to scrape a web page because I have my business website and I don't want to have to format it in a Google Doc or something. That makes no sense. And so they were scurrying around trying to build out our data sources capability. And this is the fun part of the story. I was on vacation up in Maine visiting family.
mhm.
And I don't know, I was just like relaxing somewhere. And I think I was on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. And I saw this product that kind of appeared to make website scraping really easy.
Huh.
And I was like, oh, wow, this looks pretty cool. I'm on vacation. I'm out of office, but I posted in the chatbot channel, like, hey, check this out. And paste the link to this vendor that can help us with website scraping. I knew that it was going to be a bit of a thorny challenge, right? It's one of those things where it's like, we need to get structured data predictably, and rolling it ourselves felt a little bit like, okay, like we really need to be thoughtful here, right? Because we don't want to, feels like we don't want to end up maintaining our own scraping engine,
Yeah.
basically. Even though
Yeah.
there's open source libraries, there's a process. So anyway, I posted in there. I see some chatter in the thread, and I go back to my vacation. So anyway,
That's like the classic product manager thing to do, man. Like, he's just like, hey, check this out. And then you like turn off notifications. I'm busy learning how to do improv or something. And then you come back and there's been like a whole flame war happening in that thread. I feel like
oh,
that's
yeah,
happens so often.
yeah. So anyway, I come back and I have my one-on-one with Steph, the product manager on Chatbots, and she's, hey, the team has been playing around with this, and it looks pretty good. Um, And we'd like to, once again, to get back to the point I made earlier, we'd like to explore this in a little bit more detail to see if it makes
Hmm.
sense. Little did I know, there was another team in the company that purchased another vendor
Mm.
for
They had already
scraping.
bought. They had already bought.
They had already bought. And there was some back and forth around why did you choose this vendor versus that one? The whole time we asked the engineer on the project, if I recall correctly, to basically spike a solution. Like, hey, can
Hmm.
you see how long it would take to build versus buy? I would say this is like a classic pair of the build versus buy decision, right? Can you just spike something really quick and give us a better sense of the pain that we might need to go through to get this thing up and running?
Hmm.
And so I feel like that's a standard thing, right? It's like, you can't come to a good conclusion if you don't invest a little bit to see how difficult or how easy it would be.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm trying not to give away the ending of the story. But anyway, here's the frame at the moment. It's we like what we see. We like what we see, but there's another vendor in the company, and we aren't guaranteed or we aren't like 100% sure that this vendor is dramatically better than building it ourselves.
Yeah.
So
Maybe a quick pause here because I feel like you've hit on so many good points in just that like couple minutes there because I think there's one earlier on you said something about making the product like experience good enough for somebody to be willing to go through those product buying hoops, which to me screams PLG, which was the
Yes.
hot thing a couple years ago, right? Like it still probably is, but like people don't talk about it anymore. But I feel like that is interesting because even software that is sold, meaning software that requires a sales team or somebody to go buy it, requires some level of that product experience. Maybe it's a marketing website that does a really good job of explaining. Maybe it's a click through demo. Maybe it's actually access to the product. Maybe it's open source, right? Open source could be PLG in some ways. So that's like point number one. And I think that point number two kind of harkens back to your Friday app days, right? If only the team had known there was another team using a web scraper and already bought it, and there was some level of like information dissemination, there might have been a little bit more coordination ahead of
Mhm.
time. So I'm sure you have thoughts on like coordinating remote teams, but that was just
Yeah.
one thought that popped in my head.
Yeah. So I might give away the story just a little bit early because the rest of the story is quite entertaining. Where do I even begin? Where should I pick this up? Anyway, yeah, we're at the point. Oh, yeah, I'm going to give away the story. So we like what we see with this vendor, and so the product manager's, hey, I think it would make sense if we could put down the credit card to run a more robust test and see if this really is worth our time. And so I was
Hmm.
like, yeah, sure. It's like what? I don't know, $100 a month or something. It might have been a little bit more. It might have been a little less, but it was like, once again, one of those things you could sneak under the radar a little. So we end up slapping the credit card down, and the other team goes, they look at their scraping solution, and I feel like, what's that meme where it's the guy is with his girlfriend and he looks back
Yeah.
at the other. It was like that. So the other team is, oh shoot, that's a really nice web scraper. And those APIs are really nice. And so anyway, all of a sudden they're like, oh, maybe we should evaluate it too.
Nice.
And so then there's two teams basically in the room, but we proceed, and sure enough, like the thing was super easy to implement. Like
Hmm.
product manager step is
Yeah.
absolutely stoked. The engineers, thank you, Luke, for recommending this. But I was like, yeah, I felt good because I was productive even on vacation.
Yeah.
And then we run into the joys of procurement at a bigger company. So the first thing was like, okay, so we need a credit card. Oh, go chat with someone over in procurement or whatever to get the card. That was like almost an all day long process. Who do we need to talk to get the credit card? So that was
Right.
like a little frustrating, right? But that's one of the realities of the situation. Like it just takes time. In some ways, that's actually a good thing, right? So
Don't
that's
you want to
running.
just put down your own credit card and then when the bill's $4,000 a month, you have to go expense it and no.
We almost did. There was a point where we were like, maybe we should do this because the dollar value was not that high.
Hmm.
So while we're doing that, then there's this question of if the scaled up version is going to cost, call it like, I don't know, 5 grand a year or some multi-$1,000 contract, we should probably, we need a business case.
Hmm.
And so then it's okay, let's build a business. And to get back to a previous point that I made earlier, this was really obviously monetizable because that feature is a premium feature. And the more that someone uses web scraping, the more they will end up paying us.
Mm.
And business case was actually very easy to put together because here's the deal. We pay this vendor, whatever, 5 grand a year or whatever the amount was. I'm just using a rough number. We will make a lot more, right? That's what it basically almost always boils down to is we pay them 5 or 10 grand or 15 grand and we will make 150. That's easy math, easy justification. Like that thing zooms through approvals. Then, so it's okay. Yeah, we have a business case. We found the credit card in the company and now comes the legal stuff. Yeah. Anyway, I'll stop talking for a second in case you have some questions or things you're curious about.
No. Yeah, absolutely. I feel one thought I had on the business case, right? Like usually when people go and present a business case, it feels like it's a pretty linear business case. Like, here's how much we can make. Here's the cogs, and the cogs, like the spend on this vendor is going to be this amount, and it like scales linearly with our revenue. So I think what's been interesting in looking at technology is like, where are the areas in terms of pricing where you can actually like scale the pricing exponentially? If Zapier could like somehow get a curve on that revenue, while the cogs stay pretty flat. That would be an even more powerful business case, but I feel like a lot harder to articulate.
Yeah, I would say in some ways that was true in this instance because we charge $20 a month for basic web scraping. But if you
Mhm.
want to throw a bunch more data sources at your chatbot, it's going to cost you more. And basically, our more expensive
Uh,
product is higher margin. So we do
yeah,
actually get that dynamic, just not in a. Actually, it would be pretty robust. You'd
yeah,
have that nice little curve. So yeah, okay.
yeah.
Anyway, we start chatting with legal, and I'm trying to think of how I want to frame this up. We have amazing. First of all, we have amazing legal individuals here at Zapier. That's the first thing. Very can do attitudes, but it ends up we're talking with the vendor, and they're a relatively smaller company, and they just
Mhm,
pivoted it into this space.
mhm,
And so here we are. We have certain requirements because Chatbots, while it's in beta, it will be going to general availability. And as a result, we have certain thresholds that we need to meet. Part three of the story, it involves Steph, our product manager, and legal scurrying around with the founder of this company to make sure that we checked all the boxes,
mhm.
right? Basically, did you do pen testing? Those hoops,
All
broadly
those
speaking.
compliance things
Yeah,
that bigger companies want to see these days, even on the smaller companies that they're selecting. Yeah.
exactly. And so the good news for this vendor, and I'll just tell you who the vendor is, it's Dev. They're amazing.
Okay.
We're big fans. Web scraping, AI based web scraping is the long story short.
That's great.
And
Actually, we were looking for a web scraper the other day because conference season's spinning up again, and you always want to scrape all those sponsors off the website. So firecrawl.ai, you said?
dev.
Dev. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
We'll make sure to
super,
check.
super great. They spun out of a bigger kind of initiative or another initiative. But the long story short is like the founder, Caleb, got on the phone with Steph, our product manager, got on the phone with legal, and we
Mhm.
worked it out pretty quickly. And we signed a not small contract with them. And we launched this functionality maybe 3 weeks ago. So front to back, I think we had it shipped in 2 weeks. And major props to the fire crawl team because like they got on the phone. They heard what the hey, we got to check these boxes and they were willing to work with us. And so
Yeah.
we ended up buying, not building, I would say for a variety of reasons, one of which was just like when you're a startup, showing that you want to work with a company like a Zapier or anybody for that matter sends a massive signal. Because at the end of the day,
Mhm.
if we've worked with other vendors that aren't really like they close the deal or they get close to closing the deal, but it's a pain
Yeah.
to work with them. And so I think as a startup, if you can just show like a willingness and a desire to work and see, let's see what we can do here kind of
Yeah.
attitude, I think it actually will end up leading to more buy decisions than build. Because like I said earlier, there is more friction inside of the bigger company. And so if there is friction, it basically needs to be you need a lot of conviction to be able to navigate the maze. If you don't have enough conviction in the people building the product and the quality of the product,
Yeah.
you're not going to want to go through the maze. And I could share those stories too.
I feel like that's a classic like champion, right? Like in like sales terminology. It's like you need to find that champion that's willing to go through that maze, and you need to make that champion happy. I think this is something we certainly experience as well at Anvil, which is, you know, Anvil is a pretty horizontal solution. So when we go to talk to a customer, it does take a lot of understanding what they're trying to do and then how that would fit into how we've designed Anvil and a lot of solutioning before we can even discuss pricing and how much it's going to cost and whether they want to go through that maze. And then afterwards, implementation oftentimes is it takes a couple weeks. So we stay very close. But
Yep.
that process, to your point, has definitely been having good support, being willing to jump on calls has really been great for us compared to like in the past, we were like, "Oh, let's just put up some documentation. Let's see if we can make this PLG." And I think people came, kicked the tires, and then just like left. So I feel like there is that showing that willingness is important to getting that buy decision as a startup trying to sell your software.
For sure. I would say another thing too is like that maze, if you are willing to go through the maze and get implemented inside of the organization, people generally won't leave you because the alternative is going through the maze again. And so at that point, if you've established a good relationship, if your product is reliable, it should be pretty sticky.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that's another consideration is in some ways like the procurement maze is not the most defensible thing, but it is a defensibility.
Yeah. It's a
Um,
moat for you
yeah,
in some
it
ways, right?
is.
Yeah.
It totally is. And yeah, this is the most recent build versus buy example I could think of. It's a fun one because there's like a little bit of a story angle, but I could share other stories where it's like we're still implementing the thing right now, and I signed a contract like 8 months ago.
Yeah. I feel like the takeaways I really got from your story here was there was one, build a great product with good documentation, make it easy for somebody to see the value before they paid, or make it so the value is so compelling that they're willing to go through that maze, right? Two, realize that there's going to be a maze. I think this is something that as a software developer before starting Anvil, working at like technology companies that oriented heavily towards building everything, was something I didn't realize, like how much effort it took to actually get software bought, even if you had a good product. So that's and in some ways a moat. And then just really being willing to put yourself out there and have a can-do attitude of, hey, what can we achieve together, as opposed to here are the limitations or here's what we're designed to do. But yeah.
Yeah, I spent almost a decade in PLG, and it's a wonderful motion. In some ways, maybe the reason why not that many people are talking about it is because it's like the default in many instances for many industries. But man, did I really wish I knew all this stuff back at my previous startup because it would have helped set the frame a lot better. And so that's what I feel like I can bring to the table most of this conversation is just like, there's this whole world inside of a
Yeah.
bigger company. And it's a little different than what the startup founder normally thinks. And just like learning how to navigate that and maybe at some point in your career, seeing how it works on the inside will help you be a better founder.
Yeah. And it's funny because you say this about Zapier, which is in my mind still a scrappy startup, right? Like I think I have anchored to when I first heard about Zapier like 10 years ago. And Zapier still isn't really that large of an organization compared to, let's call it, the Oracles, the
Yeah.
Googles, the Pepsis, the Cokes out there, right? So when you get through procurement at a Coke or a Pepsi or a Home Depot, that is a real mode. Their buying cycles are like 10 years. You're good to go. Yeah.
Yeah, we're like, I would say we're like somewhere further up the stack than a startup, but yeah, we're not in the enterprise land.
Yeah, that is true. I was talking to another just founder friend of mine, and they were saying that they work in the insurance space, and they were saying that the buying cycle for these insurance policy management systems or agency management systems is literally 8 years or 10 years. And so your job is to keep track of when these are coming up because you get that opportunity once every 8 years. And if you miss it, better hope that there's other opportunities coming up quickly. Fascinating. Cool. And then you actually said something interesting because you mentioned the ability to, one, take unstructured data and structure it. And that's something you guys didn't want to have to really design and architect. So feels like that was part of your decision framework. Maybe it's, hey, you knew that there was a pretty complicated problem here. And if you didn't do a good job solving it from the get-go, you could be in a world of hurt down the
Yes.
road, right? It's okay. So you were able to identify that early on, which pushed you towards the buy angle. Presumably somebody who's focused on that has to put more time thinking about it would be better at designing a scalable solution.
Yeah, I feel like if there's anything I could convey, if you're building product, it's what are those core value drivers? And be very specific. And if you are thinking about building something outside of that, you should really reconsider.
Yeah.
Right? You should really reconsider. And that's another thing. I feel like there's maybe two lessons that I'm trying to convey here. One is like buying cycles in a bigger company are more complicated than a startup founder may think. And the second is if you are building product and you are spending lots of your time going down rabbit trails that are not native to your value prop, like what are you doing? I'm sure there's a half decent vendor somewhere. And if there isn't, maybe that's a good startup to build.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe that's a pivot, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's how Firecrawl ended up doing what they're doing. They learned that web scraping was really difficult. And they were like,
Yeah.
wait, what are we doing? Let's go after this. So yeah, there's a story there.
Nice. And then just got back to the very beginning. You had a comment around, it's like working on 4 startups at the same time at Zapier because you have all these 4 products that you're working on. And in my mind, I was thinking, wow, one startup. I also have a young daughter, and one startup, one child is more than I can handle at any point in time. You must be wired differently to be able to work on all 4 of these at the same time. But I'm excited, and it must be fun to be able to
It
switch
is.
between all of these areas, right? And it does have a cohesive narrative that kind of ties together, in the end too.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. If there was anything I could say, there's a great team of people working on these that makes my
Yeah,
job easier, but it's a little busy around here.
I can only imagine. Cool. Maybe now's a good time to wrap up this conversation. I know we always like to ask one, what is something you're excited about you're working on, both personally or professionally? Yeah, just would love to hear what's going on in the brain of Luke.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I'll share something that I'm pretty excited about these days. Okay. So I have a 5-year-old son turning 6. He's entering kindergarten, and we're actually doing full-time homeschooling, my wife and I.
Wow.
I'm the science teacher. And so I have been using AI a bunch to create syllabus, lesson plans. I've been creating like personalized stories to include in the lesson plan. But the long story short is one thing I'm really excited about is the level of personalization that AI
Mm,
can provide in teaching. And so my favorite example, which I was telling someone about maybe an hour ago, is I'll have a theme for what I'm teaching, and I will use AI to generate a story based on my child's interests. And then
huh.
I will use 11 labs to create audio. So it's text to audio. I'll generate basically an audio story. And then at one point in the lesson, I'll be like, hey, Ben, here is a story. You should listen to it. And so it's reinforcing the theme. It's talking
Oh,
about his personalized interests. And he's just glued. He's 5 years old, so he likes any form of entertainment, but he
yeah.
is just glued. And so I'm very excited. This is an area I just outside of work that I'm really excited about because on one hand, it's like it's scratching the technologist itch.
Yeah.
It's fun playing around with AI. That's another itch. And it's also wildly productive and beneficial for my family. And so that's something that I've been pretty excited about as of late. And there's some Zapier workflows that can power this too.
That's awesome. I feel like I'm seeing we're at the age where we're still reading really basic children's books, and I'm always like, we should just create this. And my wife's always like, can't you just get ChatGPT to write one, and then we'll figure out how to publish it? Yeah, I guess we could. And but I wonder, like, you seem to have a structure around that, and like specific prompts that you're using to create entertainment out of a corpus of like information that you've curated for a child, right?
For sure.
Um, so I feel like that pre-work is probably extremely important to making the story, the educational content relevant and entertaining in a lot of ways, I feel.
Yeah, yeah. I try to put a little thought into it, but I will say it's definitely not rocket science. But I've just been blown away at it feels like 100x improved. And so I'm excited to continue to tinker on stuff like this.
That's awesome. I feel like one of the thoughts I had early on in this whole AI craze was what's going to happen to humanity, right? As in the human side of life with AI bots taking over everything. And this is a pretty prime example of, hey, you actually have to better understand your child, listen to their interests, be present so that you can then take those inputs and then go and craft like a curated educational program for
Yeah.
him. That's pretty cool.
It's fun.
Cool. And then the last question we always like to ask is what is a product you've recently purchased that you either loved or would never buy again?
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Um, yeah, I would say product that I've recently purchased. I am pretty stingy when it comes to my own personal, we'll call it software purchases. I love Claude. I think it just absolutely crushes ChatGPT. I love projects. I love how it generates code. I love artifacts. I have a Chrome extension that I built with Claude that's basically like my own Trello clone. And so every time I open up a new tab, it will show me my little Kanban board
Nice.
using local storage and all that. And Claude definitely, I think, has it's been amazing for me. I love that product, and there's a few things I don't like, but overall, it just has a great user experience. And I think that they're pushing the limits around what can chat do, like that
Mm,
extends just a chat interface. So I'm just like very interested in how these varying AI products will build they'll reuse a lot of the interfaces we're used to, but they'll add their own special AI flavor. So anyway, yeah,
Huh.
Claude is definitely my favorite purchases of late.
That's awesome. I feel like that Kanban board that you use, you mentioned every time you open a new tab can be like very helpful from a productivity perspective, but also anxiety inducing. It's, oh man, my list of things that are still not done. I have a recurring calendar invite that just keeps getting moved by my wife. And then it's called to do/discuss, and it always changes. And then there's always things in there that get snuck in. Move the rug, and the rug is underneath like a full size queen size bed, and there's a bunch of stuff underneath the bed, and it's like a 14-foot rug. I'm like,
Oh yes.
yeah,
I
that
did
one's
that
gonna
like 3
be
weeks ago.
yeah, that one's gonna be on the next one as well. We're not gonna knock that one out anytime
Hunt.
soon.
Anyway,
Oh man.
cool.
Yeah. Luke, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you and learning a little bit more about the things you're launching at Zapier and how you guys make decisions internally. Really enjoyed. We touched on a lot of topics today. PLG, we talked about sales cycles and sales processes, talked about AI. So that was a lot of fun. Talked about vacation and going on X. Covered a lot of ground. And yeah, I hope to be able to have you back on the show sometime down the road.
I'm ready whenever you are.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks again.
See ya.
Thank you for listening. If you found this show valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or here on YouTube. We'd love if you could leave us a rating and/or a review, as that helps others find this podcast. See you next time.